comment below. These comments keep this channel alive, and I read every single one. Now let us get into it. Story 1. My name is Gary Faulkner, and I have been a long-haul trucker for 18 years. I have driven every major corridor in this country. I have been through the Rockies in February whiteouts and across the Texas Panhandle in June heat that warps the road into a mirror. I have slept in rest stops in 42 states, and I have eaten bad food in diners that exist only to serve people who are always passing through. I am not a person who spooks easily, and I am not a person who tells stories to impress people. I tell this story because it happened and because I think about it often enough that I need other people to know it. None of it prepared me for what happened on a dead-end county road in eastern Kentucky 3 summers ago. I was running a refrigerated load from Knoxville up toward Ashland, produce, time-sensitive. My dispatcher had flagged a fuel stop outside of Paintsville that was supposedly 12 cents cheaper per gallon than anything else on my route, and over a full tank that adds up to real money. So I deviated off the main route to check it out. This happens. You take a side trip for fuel or a way station bypass, and you add a few miles, but you save time or money somewhere else. This was a normal business decision. The station turned out to be closed. Not closed for the night, closed permanently. Windows boarded, the pumps removed entirely, the canopy overhead sagging and overgrown with the creeping vines that move in on abandoned structures in that part of the state faster than anywhere I've seen. I turned around in the gravel lot and started heading back the way I came. About 4 miles back towards the main road, I took a wrong turn. I will own that. I've been driving professionally for nearly 2 decades, and I took a wrong turn on a county road in the dark because I was tired and the intersection was unmarked and both roads looked the same in the headlights at that angle. I figured it out pretty quickly because the road started narrowing immediately, the pavement giving way to packed gravel, and then to something that was barely wider than my truck, with trees pressing in from both sides close enough that branches were dragging the mirrors. The road was heading down into a hollow, dropping steadily, getting darker and tighter, and I knew I was in trouble because there was not enough room to turn around, and I was going to have to back the whole rig out the way I had come. I stopped the truck and killed the engine because I needed to think, and the noise of the idle was making it hard to concentrate on what I was working on in my head. The silence that dropped in when the engine went off was the most complete silence I've experienced in 18 years of night driving. Not just quiet, complete. No insects, no wind in the trees, no distant traffic on any road. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I sat in that silence for maybe 30 seconds, and then I climbed down from the cab to get a look at the road behind me, to figure out how much clearance I had on either side, and how far I was going to have to back before I found a wide spot. I walked about 20 feet behind the trailer with my mag light and looked at the road. Tight but possible. Then I turned to look forward, past the cab, down into the hollow where the road continued dropping into the dark. About 80 feet ahead of me, standing in the center of the road in the beam of my headlights, there was a man. He was facing away from me, toward the deeper hollow, toward whatever was down there in the dark, past the reach of my lights. He was not moving, just standing there, in the middle of a dead-end gravel track at midnight in eastern Kentucky, with no vehicle anywhere, and no reason on earth to be there. Average build, dark clothing, no hat. Just standing with his back to me, looking down into the hollow. I called out, "Hey, you all right up there?" He did not respond, did not move. I waited maybe 10 seconds and called again. Nothing. I walked up closer to about 50 feet and called a third time. Nothing. At 40 feet, I stopped walking because I realized something was wrong with the way he was not moving. It was not the normal stillness of a person who is standing still. A person who is standing still moves in small ways. A shift of weight, a turn of the head toward a voice, the small rhythmic motion of breathing visible in the shoulders. There was none of that. He was completely stationary in a way that I can only describe as wrong. like a photograph of a person, like something that had learned the shape of a person but had not learned the detail of how a person inhabits that shape. I stood there at 40 feet watching him for probably 2 minutes. He did not move. He did not respond. He did not react to me in any way. I went back to my truck. I climbed in, I locked the doors, and I started backing that rig up that narrow gravel road by rear camera, an instinct for what turned out to be almost 3/4 of a mile before I found enough width to get turned around. I did not look forward at the road ahead during any of that backing. I kept my eyes on the rear camera and the side mirrors, and I did not think about what was standing in the road 40 feet past the front of my cab. When I finally got turned around and got the truck pointed back the way I had come, I did not look in my mirrors. I did not want to see whether the figure was still there or whether it had moved. I drove out of that hollow and back to the county road and back to the main route, and I delivered my load to Ashland, and I ate breakfast at a diner outside of Huntington, and I called my wife, and I did not tell her what had happened because I did not know how to say it in a way that would sound like something that actually occurred. I have thought about this conversation I am not having with my wife at least once a week for 3 years. A man standing in a dead-end road at midnight who does not respond to voice, who does not breathe, who does not move in any way a living person moves, is either in some kind of profound medical emergency, or he is not what he appears to be. If it was a medical emergency, I left someone in the dark. I have to live with that, but I do not think it was a medical emergency. I know which one I believe, and I know which one keeps me from looking in my mirrors on certain dark Kentucky roads at certain hours. I have not been back to that county. Story 2, the thing Nadine heard in the sawmill building. I work for the County Historical Preservation Office in Wise County, Virginia. My job is documentation, photographing and cataloging old structures that have been nominated for the Historic Register. Farmhouses, churches, stone walls, mill foundations, outbuildings, cemeteries in need of mapping. I spend a lot of time in old buildings alone, and I have a practiced tolerance for the discomfort of those spaces, the low ceilings and the smell of old wood, and the particular silence that collects in abandoned places, the way water collects in low ground. My name is Nadine Colwell, and I have done this work for 9 years. I want to be honest about where I stood on the supernatural before this happened. I did not believe in it. I am a methodical person, trained as an architectural historian, and my approach to my work is evidence-based. I record what I can see and measure and photograph. I do not record impressions or feelings. In 9 years of walking through old structures alone, I had never experienced anything that challenged that approach. The building I'm going to tell you about was a pre-Civil War sawmill operation on a tributary creek in the western part of Wise County, partially intact, sitting about 3 miles from any paved road. The nomination had come in the year before, and it had taken me that long to get the access agreement finalized with the landowner, who was in his 80s and did not move quickly on paperwork and could not be rushed. When I finally got out there, it was a late October afternoon with about 4 hours of solid daylight remaining, which I thought would be sufficient. The site was more extensive than the nomination described. The main mill building was 2-story stone, Civil War era at the earliest and possibly older, in remarkable condition given its age and the lack of any maintenance. The stone was laid dry in sections and with lime mortar in others, which suggested multiple construction phases. Attached to the main building by a covered passage was a secondary wooden structure that had been the equipment shed, lower and narrower than the main building, with enough of the roof still on to keep it reasonably weathertight. I started in the main building and worked room by room the way I always do, moving from the front of the structure to the back, photographing and measuring and making notes in my field book. Everything was normal. The light through the old window openings was good enough to work without my headlamp on in most of the spaces. I was productive and settled, and enjoying the building the way I do when the structure is interesting and the documentation is going well. When I moved through the connecting passage into the equipment shed, the temperature changed. Not a draft from a gap in the exterior, a settled cold. The kind that has been in a space long enough to become the ambient temperature of that space. Colder than the passage I had just left, and noticeably colder than the mild October afternoon outside. I noted it. Old stone and timber buildings hold cold differently than the air around them. I kept working. I was at the far end of the equipment shed, photographing what remained of an old horizontal shaft housing on the west wall, when I heard a sound from behind me, a dragging sound. Something heavy being pulled slowly across the old wooden floor, maybe 8 or 10 feet of travel, then stopping. I turned around immediately. The shed was empty. The floor in front of me, the entire length of old plank floor I could see, was empty and undisturbed. The dragging sound had been clear and specific. Not a settling creak, and not the sound of an animal. Something substantial had been dragged across that floor. I waited, watched the floor. Nothing. I turned back to my work. The sound started again. Same quality, same length, same deliberate pace, same stop. I turned fast enough that if anything physical had been moving, I would have caught the end of it. The floor was undisturbed. The dust that had settled on the boards over decades of abandonment was undisturbed. I kept working because I'm not the kind of person who leaves a job unfinished. This was a mistaken judgment. The third time the sound started, I was already watching. I had turned to face the empty shed before finishing my note, and I was looking at the floor in the section where the sound had come from each time. The sound started, it went 8 feet, maybe 10 feet, slow and deliberate, and I was watching the floor where it was happening, and the dust did not move, and nothing was there. I packed my bag, I walked back through the passage and out of the main building, and I did not stop moving until I was in my car. I did the exterior documentation from photographs I'd already taken and filed my report, with a note about structural concerns limiting my interior access, which was not entirely false given the situation. About a month later, I called the landowner to return some signed forms. He asked how the old equipment shed had looked. I told him structurally sound. He said, "My grandfather always talked about that shed. He said he would hear something dragging in there. He said it like a person states a known fact about a piece of property, the way you mention the low spot in the field that floods every spring. Neutral, factual. Then he said, I never go in there myself. Neither will I. The documentation report is on file. The section on the equipment shed interior is incomplete, and I have given my notice that I will not be returning to finish it." Story 4. What Dwight and Pam saw coming down off Hawksbill. My wife Pam and I have been hiking the Shenandoah for 30 years. We are both retired teachers in our late 60s, and we stay in reasonable physical condition. We know those trails the way people know things they have returned to across decades. Not just from memory, but in the body. In the way the feet recognize a grade, and the lungs know what the altitude feels like. We have hiked Hawksbill Mountain in every season. We have been on the Salamander Trail in summer thunderstorms and in February snow. We know what to expect up there. My name is Dwight Mercer, and I want to tell you about something that happened on a September afternoon 2 years ago that my wife and I have not been able to account for with anything we know about the natural world. We had started at the upper trailhead and taken the main summit trail up, spent about an hour at the top, and were descending on the Salamander Trail, which is longer and gentler and which we prefer when we have the time. The day was clear and warm for September. We had seen several other groups on the ascent, but by mid-afternoon the trail had mostly cleared. People head back to their cars when it gets toward 3 o'clock, and the parking lots start filling with day hikers heading home. We were about 1.5 miles from the trailhead, descending through a section of old-growth hemlock that I have always considered one of the best stretches of trail in the park. The hemlocks in this section are very large, very old, and dense enough that the canopy closes almost completely overhead. The trail under them is dark and quiet and cool even in summer, a kind of cathedral quality that I find genuinely moving. We have always liked this section. This time was different. Pam took hold of my arm about 100 feet into the hemlock section. She did not say anything. This was unusual because Pam is a person who says things. I looked at her and she was looking to the left of the trail, her expression focused and still. I looked where she was looking. 40 feet into the hemlocks, off the trail, standing between two of the larger trunks, there was a figure. I want to be precise, because precision is what I have and what I owe you. The figure was tall, taller than an adult person by a significant margin, maybe 1.5 to 2 feet taller. It was dark, not wearing dark clothing, but dark in itself, the way a shadow is dark when the light source that creates it is behind you. It had the rough shape of a human figure, but the proportions were wrong in ways I am still trying to articulate. The arms were too long, the trunk too narrow, the head larger than it should have been relative to the body, and it was completely still, facing us, in the way of something that was watching us, rather than the way of something that happened to be there. We both saw it. I cannot emphasize this enough. Pam and I both stopped at the same moment and looked at the same thing. And we have compared our descriptions of what we saw many times since that afternoon, and they match in every particular. We are not people who are prone to shared imagination. We are two retired science teachers who taught a combined 60 years of how to observe carefully and record accurately. We did not speak. We walked, not running, because running would have been an acknowledgement. And something in both of us understood this and made the same choice without discussion. We walked the remainder of the hemlock section at a pace that was faster than our normal trail pace, but not a run. We did not look back. When we came out into the open section beyond the hemlocks, we stopped by mutual unspoken agreement and caught our breath. Pam said, "What was that?" I told her I did not know. We've considered every rational explanation across 2 years of quiet conversation. A hiker in very dark gear who happened to be standing between those trees. A shadow from the late afternoon sun through the hemlocks, cast at an unusual angle by the terrain. A bear standing up. We know what a standing bear looks like. We have seen them. A standing black bear is a recognizable shape with a recognizable proportion. What we saw was not that. We went back the following spring deliberately, on a clear morning when the light in the hemlock section would be at its best. We walked the salamander trail, came to the section, walked through it. There was nothing there. But when we reached the place where we had both stopped, the place in front of those two particular hemlocks, neither of us could make ourselves look directly into the space between the trunks. We both noticed this about the other and ourselves, and did not mention it until we were past and in the open again. We have not been able to explain that either. We still hike Hawksbill. We still take the salamander trail. We take it in the morning now, before the shadows come in under the hemlocks in the afternoon, and we do not discuss the reason for this adjustment because we do not need to. Story 3. My name is Ronald Thacker. For 22 years, I worked as a security officer for a coal company in McDowell County, West Virginia. Night patrol mostly, driving the access roads around the company's properties, checking gates and equipment yards, and the fencing around the prep plant. It was lonely work by most people's standards. You are out there on those mountain roads at 2 a.m, and it is just you and the truck and the dark, and the occasional deer in the headlights. I did not mind it. I'm a person who has always been comfortable in the dark, and I know McDowell County roads the way a piano player knows a keyboard, by feel and by memory, without having to think about it. There are things about working night security in coal country that people do not talk about much. The land in McDowell County has a particular history, particular weight. People have worked under that ground and died under that ground for over 100 years. The land carries that the way old land carries things. I am not a superstitious man, but I'm a man who has spent 2 decades alone on mountain roads at night. And I will tell you plainly that some roads feel different from others, and sometimes of night feel different from others, and some places simply have a quality that you do not get used to, no matter how many times you pass through them. This happened in my 11th year on the job. February, cold enough to freeze the creek in the lower sections, clear sky, nearly a full moon. I was running my standard patrol loop, which took me about 3.5 hours from the time I left the main office gate to the time I got back. I had done that loop probably close to 4,000 times by that point. I knew every turn, every rough section, every gate that sticks in cold weather. About 2 miles up the Booth Creek spur, I came around a long curve and my headlights swept across something on the road ahead that was not supposed to be there. A person. Standing at the right shoulder of the road, half in the ditch, looking down toward the frozen creek. I slowed and pulled up alongside them and stopped. He was an older man, heavy-set in a canvas work jacket and dark work pants. No hat, no coat that would have been adequate for February in McDowell County. He was just standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking down at the ice on the creek. He did not look up when I pulled alongside him. He seemed absorbed by whatever he was looking at. I rolled down my window. "Evening, you doing okay out here?" He looked up and over at me, and he had the most unremarkable face I have ever seen on a person. Not distinctive in any direction. Just a face. He said he was fine. He was looking at the water. His tone was not strange, not hostile, not confused, not frightened. Just calm. The way a person is calm when they are doing something they have done many times before. I asked if his vehicle had broken down somewhere, on the spur or back on the main road. He said no, he had walked out. I asked from where. He said from up the hollow. I want you to understand the geography here, so you understand why that answer was not possible. The Booth Creek spur ran about 6 miles up into the hollow before it dead-ended at the prep plant site. The prep plant had been decommissioned 8 years earlier and was fully fenced and locked. Beyond the plant site, there was nothing. No houses, no structures of any kind, just company land going up into the mountain. The nearest residence accessible from that road was a farmhouse I had passed about 3 miles behind me coming onto the spur. So this man had either walked 3 miles in February dark from that farmhouse to stand in a ditch on a company road, looking at a frozen creek at 11 at night, which made no sense, or he had come from somewhere up the hollow, past the decommissioned plant, which made less sense. I asked him if he wanted a ride. He looked back at the creek and said, "No thank you," he was going to stay a while. His voice was even. He was not being strange about it, not nervous, not threatening. He simply did not want to ride. He wanted to look at the water. I asked his name. He said something that I did not quite catch. A name. It started with something like a W sound. I asked him to repeat it. He looked at me and smiled slightly and said it again, and I still could not quite hear it, could not quite resolve it into a name I recognized. This was not because he was speaking quietly. He was speaking at a normal volume, and the truck window was down, and there was no wind. The name just did not land clearly in my ear, the way a word sometimes sounds when you are listening to someone speak a language that is close to English, but not English. I told him to stay warm. I drove onto the gate, checked it, logged it, and drove back. When I came back through that section of the road 20 minutes later, the man was gone. I slowed to a stop at the exact location where he had been standing. The snow on the road shoulder was untouched. Not just untouched where he had been standing. Untouched in both directions as far as my headlights showed, which was a good 50 feet in each direction from where he had been. No footprints in the compressed roadside snow going toward the farmhouse. No footprints going deeper up the hollow. Nothing. I sat in my truck for a while with the window down listening. February quiet on a still night in McDowell County, which is some of the quietest quiet there is. Nothing. I wrote it in my log, because I write everything in my log. Unidentified individual on Booth Creek Spur, observed at mile marker 2 approximately. Male, older. Stated he was walking. No vehicle located, no distress, no further contact. I did not write the part about the footprints because I did not know how to write it in a way that sounded like a security log entry rather than something else. Some things go in the log and some things go in that place in your chest where you keep the things that do not fit anywhere. Story 4. What Dwight and Pam saw coming down off Hawksbill. My wife Pam and I have been hiking the Shenandoah for 30 years. We are both retired teachers, late 60s, and we keep ourselves in good shape. We know those trails. We have hiked Hawksbill Mountain in every season, including winter, and we know what to expect up there, and how to read the weather and the terrain. My name is Dwight Mercer, and I want to tell you about something that happened on a September afternoon 2 years ago that my wife and I have not been able to account for with anything we know. We had started at the upper trailhead and taken the main summit trail up, spent about an hour at the top, and we're coming back down on the Salamander Trail, which is the longer but gentler descent route. The day was clear and still a little warm for September. We'd seen a few other groups on the way up, but the trail had mostly emptied out by mid-afternoon when people head back to their cars. We were about 1.5 miles from the bottom, where the trail passes through a section of old-growth hemlock that is dense enough to block the sky. This stretch of trail is maybe 1/4 mile long and always feels darker and quieter than the rest of the mountain. We have always liked it. This time was different. Pam grabbed my arm about 100 feet into the hemlock section. She did not say anything. I looked at her and she was looking to the left of the trail. I looked where she was looking. There was a figure standing about 40 feet off the trail in the hemlocks, standing completely still between two large trunks. The figure was tall, taller than a typical person, and it was dark, not wearing dark clothing, but dark in itself, the way a shadow is dark. It had a roughly human shape, but the proportions were not right. The arms were too long, the head was too large. It was just standing there facing us. We both saw it. That is the important thing. Pam and I both saw it at the same moment, and we have compared our descriptions many times since, and they match. We did not speak. We walked. Not running, but fast. The fast walking of people who have decided not to run because running would confirm something. We walked the rest of that hemlock stretch and did not stop until we were in the open again, where you can see to the tree line. When we stopped, Pam said, "What was that?" I said, "I did not know." We have considered every explanation. A hiker in dark gear standing still. A shadow cast at an odd angle by the late afternoon sun through the hemlocks. A bear standing up. We know what a bear looks like standing up. We both taught science for 30 years, and we are not people who jump to unusual conclusions. But we have no explanation that accounts for the proportions. The arms were wrong. The head was wrong. Whatever it was not a person, and it was not a bear. We went back the following spring. We hiked the Salamander Trail again on purpose. When we reached the hemlock section, we both walked it with our eyes on the trees to the left. There was nothing there, but there was a stretch of about 40 feet where neither of us could make ourselves look directly into the space between those two particular hemlocks. We both noticed it afterward, and neither of us could explain why. We still hike Hawksbill, but we always do it before noon now, and we always take the main trail down. Story 5. I run my own bookkeeping business out of my home in Grayson County, Virginia. I've done this for 16 years, working primarily with small businesses and farms in the county, doing their quarterly filings and payroll and the occasional audit prep. I am not a dramatic person. My profession requires exactness and patience, and a tolerance for the unglamorous work of making numbers behave. My name is Terry Osgood, and I am 51 years old. I have lived alone since my husband passed 4 years ago. I mention the living alone because it matters to the story in a particular way. When you lose the person who has been in your house with you for 22 years, the house changes. The sounds of it change. You become newly aware of every creak and settle and tick of a structure you thought you knew completely, because now you are the only person in it, and you have to relearn what each sound means without a second person to ask. You become, against your will, very attuned to the space you occupy. The call started about 8 months after my husband died. I want to be careful about how I frame this because I know what the reasonable explanation is, and I have sat with it, turned it over, tried it on from every angle. I cannot accept it, and I am a bookkeeper. I deal in numbers that either balance or they do not. The first call came on a Tuesday morning in late spring, I was at my desk in the office off the kitchen, which is where I have always worked, and my cell phone rang with a number I did not recognize. Virginia area code, 7-digit local format, nothing distinctive about it, I answered. There was a moment of the particular quality of an open line, the ambient texture of a held connection, and then nothing. No voice, no breathing, no sound beyond the faint hiss of an active call. I said hello twice and hung up. The second call was 3 days later, same thing. I said hello 3 times this time and stayed on the line for about 40 seconds before hanging up. By the 4th call, I'd started keeping a log, because I am the kind of person who keeps logs. Date, time, duration, what I heard. The log from those months shows 9 calls over 14 weeks, roughly 1 every 10 days, with some clusters and some gaps, all incoming, all from the same number, all the same. The active line, the ambient hiss, nothing else. On the 7th call, I said, "Who is this?" And there was a sound that was not quite language. It had the rhythm and the cadence of speech, the particular music of someone talking, without any of the content, as if the content had been removed and only the shape of it remained. I stayed on the line for almost 2 minutes, listening to the shape of speech with no words in it. Then I hung up and sat at my desk for a while before I could go back to work. I tried calling the number back. It rang twice. Then a tone I had not encountered before. Not a standard busy signal, and not the recorded message you get from a disconnected number. A flat, sustained, pure tone that continued until I hung up. I reported it to my carrier. They confirmed the incoming calls in my log, but said the originating number resolved to no registered account, which they told me was possible with certain internet-based calling applications. They suggested I block the number. I did not block it. I do not know why I did not block it. I think I was afraid of what that decision meant. The 8th call was on a Wednesday evening in September, about 7 months after my husband died. I was in the kitchen making dinner when my phone rang. The number, I answered, and there was the active line and the ambient hiss, and then my name. My name in my husband's voice. His voice, exactly. The particular way he drew out the first syllable when he was in a patient mood and wanted me to know it. The cadence of it, the texture of it. 17 years. I listened to that voice across the kitchen or living room or bed, and I know it the way I know my own face. This was his voice saying my name. I stood in my kitchen, and I did not hang up. I said, "Who is this?" There was nothing after that. Just the hiss, and then silence as the call ended from the other side. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Because my legs were not reliable, I stayed there for a while. I know what grief does. I've read the literature because my therapist gave me some after he died, and I'm the kind of person who reads the literature. Auditory hallucinations of lost loved ones are documented across cultures and throughout human history. They are common. They are not indicative of anything pathological. They are the mind's attempt to process an absence so fundamental that it reaches for the presence anyway. But I was not hallucinating. I was holding a phone that had rung with a number that my carrier could confirm in my call log, a number I had been receiving calls from for 7 months. And I heard his voice through that phone. This was not a private interior experience. It came through a device. It came from outside me. I heard his voice twice more over the following 2 months. Then the call stopped. January, the call stopped, and they have not resumed. I have one thing left to tell you, and I am aware of how it sounds. The number in my call log that my carrier could not resolve to any account, I looked it up one afternoon online the way you do when you are not sure what else to try. The exchange, the prefix, the pattern of it. It was not registered to any carrier. It was not a VoIP prefix I could identify. But the pattern of it, the specific pattern of those 10 digits, was the same pattern as the phone number my husband had in the house where he grew up. The house his parents built. The house that burned down in 1987 and has not had a phone since. I am a bookkeeper. I deal in things that either balance or they do not. I have not found a way to make this balance. If these stories are getting to you, good. That means they are doing their job. Before we go on, I want to ask you to hit that like button if you have been listening this long. It helps more people find this channel, which means more of these stories reach the people who need to hear them. And if you want to support the channel directly, the membership link is in the description below. Every single member makes this work possible. Now back to it. Story 6. I am 63 years old, and I have been ice fishing on Virginia and Kentucky lakes since I was 14 years old. My name is Raymond Burks. I know frozen water. I know how it sounds when you walk on it, the different pitches it makes depending on depth and thickness. I know how to read a surface from 50 yards to tell you whether it is safe to cross. I know the difference between good solid blue-green ice and the dangerous kinds. After nearly 50 years out there, I know what belongs on a frozen lake in January and what does not. What I'm going to tell you, I have told only my son once, and even he did not quite know what to say. 3 winters ago, I was fishing a private lake in Russell County, Virginia, a small impoundment on a farm belonging to an old friend of my father's, the kind of access that goes back 2 generations and does not require a formal agreement. I had been fishing that lake for decades. About 7 inches of ice, excellent conditions, temperature well below freezing, sky white and still. I had arrived around first light and had my holes drilled and tip-up set and had been sitting in my portable shelter for about 2 hours. I came out to check a flag on the far tip-up, which had tripped. About 300 yards across the lake, there was a figure sitting over an ice fishing hole. Classic posture, sitting on a bucket, head down over the hole, elbows on knees. Dark jacket, cap pulled low. Everything about it was exactly right for the scene. I did not recognize the person, but the lake had 2 or 3 other parties with access, and I had not met everyone who used it. I assumed it was one of them. I went back to my own fishing. I checked the false run flag, reset the tip up, and went back into my shelter. Another hour and a half passed. When I came out again to check my lines, I glanced across the lake. The figure was still there. Same position, head down, not moving. Dedicated fisherman. I've been that person many times. I went back to work. The light started going the way it goes in January in the mountains, which is fast and complete. 1 hour you have light, the next you are losing it. I was thinking about packing up, and I decided before I left, I would walk over and introduce myself. Courtesy, and also, I was curious about how the fishing had been on that side of the lake. At 100 yards, I began to notice something that I noted and then pushed aside. The hole in front of the figure was old. Old ice, refrozen, the surface over it opaque and thick and dull, rather than the clear dark of a freshly drilled hole. Nobody fishes a refrozen hole. There is nothing to fish through. So whatever reason this person was sitting with their head down over that spot in the ice, it was not because they were fishing. I noted this and told myself there were explanations. Equipment issues. Resting. Maybe they had drilled a new hole nearby that I could not see from this angle. At 50 yards, I called out. No response. At 30 yards, I called again. The figure did not look up, did not shift weight, did not turn the head even slightly toward the sound of my voice calling across a completely silent lake. At 20 yards, I could see that the bucket under the figure was weathered, old plastic. The surface chalky and cracked in the way plastic gets when it has spent years outdoors rather than in a garage or shed. At 10 yards, I saw the jacket clearly. It was dark gray, faded, but faded in a specific way that I recognized because I have been outdoors my entire life. That is not the fade of a jacket that has been worn hard in the field for years. That is the fade of a garment that has been left outside without being worn, exposed to sun and rain and freeze cycles. degrading without the protection of a body inside it. That jacket had been outside for a long time, a very long time. I stopped at 10 yards. I want to be honest about why. It was not the jacket, or not only the jacket, it was that I could not see the figure's breath. It was 18 degrees Fahrenheit on that lake, and I could see my own breath clearly in the still air. I could not see theirs. I stood at 10 yards from another person on a January lake in 18-degree air, and they were not producing any breath that was warmer than the surrounding temperature. I did not go closer. I turned around and I walked back to my shelter at a measured pace, and I packed my gear with my back to the lake, and then I walked the 300 yards to the shore, keeping the figure in my peripheral vision the entire way. It did not move during that walk. When I reached the bank, I turned and looked across the lake one time. The figure was still sitting there in the last gray light, head down over the old refrozen hole. I drove home. I told my son that evening. He listened, asked a few questions, did not have anything to offer. We do not talk about it now. The lake is good fishing. I have no intention of going back. Story 7. My name is Leslie Drummond. I drive school bus for Floyd County, Kentucky. Early mornings, the same routes every day, the same hollows and ridge roads and creek crossings in all weather and all seasons for 11 years. I know every mailbox on my route. I know which driveways flood when it rains and which dogs will be waiting at the fence when I pass. I know the road the way a person knows something they have traveled over thousands of times, not by thinking about it, but by feel. There is a one-lane bridge on my route that crosses a tributary creek feeding into Caney Fork. Old concrete, solid, maintained by the county. Nothing remarkable about it. I cross it twice every morning, once going out to the first stop and once coming back through, and twice every afternoon. 4 crossings a day, 5 days a week, 40 school weeks a year. In 11 years, I have crossed that bridge somewhere north of 8,000 times. I know every crack in the railing, every stain on the deck, the way the bridge sounds different in the cold than in the heat. In late November, about 2 years ago, on a Tuesday morning, I came around the curve before the bridge in full dark at 5:40 in the morning, and my headlights picked up a figure on the bridge. A woman, standing on the pedestrian railing on the downstream side, not gripping it, not balanced against it in a precarious way, standing on top of the concrete rail as though it were a sidewalk, looking down at the water below. She was wearing a white nightgown, no coat, no shoes, bare feet on the concrete rail in late November at 5:40 in the morning. I stopped the bus. I had no students yet. I was still running the outbound loop to the first stop. I opened the door and called out to her. She turned her head and looked at me across the distance of the bridge deck. Then she stepped down off the rail onto the bridge, walked to the downstream end, stepped off the bridge onto the bank, and walked into the brush and the dark along the creek. Unhurried, like someone finishing a walk. I called county dispatch. They had a deputy out within 20 minutes. He walked both banks of the creek downstream from the bridge as far as the light led him, checked the road shoulders, knocked on the door of the nearest house a half-mile up the hollow. No one. No tire tracks that suggested someone had dropped a person at the bridge. No footprints in the light frost on the bank. Nothing. I told myself there was an explanation. There is always an explanation that stops just short of what you actually saw. I told myself she had been somewhere nearby. She had climbed down the far bank embankment. She had followed the creek bed where there would be no trackable surface. I drove my route and I told myself these things. She was there again 2 weeks later. Same position on the same railing, same direction, same nightgown. This time when I stopped the bus and opened the door and called out, she did not look at me. She did not acknowledge me in any way. I sat with the door open watching her stand on that railing over the dark water in November for what I would guess was 4 or 5 minutes, and she did not move. She did not turn toward my voice. She did not shift her weight. I reached for my radio to call dispatch, and at the moment my hand touched the radio, she stepped off the railing onto the bridge deck, walked to the end, walked off the bank, and was gone into the brush before I raised anyone. I've seen her 4 times over a period of about 8 months. Always before dawn. Always the same railing, same nightgown, same direction she faces when she stands there. The 3rd time she looked at me and held the look for a long moment before she walked away. The 4th time she did not react to me at all. She has not appeared since April. 8 months now and nothing. I drive that bridge 4 times every school day. On dark mornings, I slow down coming around that curve. Not because I'm afraid of seeing her. I have thought about this, and I am not sure afraid is the right word for what I feel. It is something more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something without a railing. The pull of it. The awareness of what is down there. I slow down because if she is on that railing again, I want to be stopped before my headlights reach her, not after. I want to have a moment before she knows I am there. A retired teacher I drove on a field trip last spring asked me how long I'd had the bridge route. We got to talking about the county roads, and I mentioned the Caney Fork Bridge. She got a particular look, the kind people get when something connects unexpectedly. And she told me that her mother-in-law had told her years ago that a woman had been found in that creek. She did not know the date, before the current bridge was built, which would put it before the early 70s at the earliest. She said it was the kind of thing the older families in the Hollow knew about, and understood and did not discuss with people from outside. I thanked her and I thought about that the rest of the day. Not about what it means, about the way she stands on that railing looking at the water, and whether she knows she keeps coming back, and whether she knows the bridge is different now than it was, and whether any of those things matter to her at all. Story 8, 3 miles from anyone. This is going to sound like something out of a movie, and I understand that, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. My name is Carl Yates. I am 44 years old, and I own a small excavating company in Harlan County, Kentucky. We do road work, site prep, utility line installation, grading. I run equipment myself, and I manage crews. I am outdoors in rough country for most of the year, and I have been doing this since I was in my early 20s, working for my uncle before I bought the business from him. I am a practical person who deals in concrete problems and concrete solutions, and who does not spend a lot of time on things that cannot be measured or priced or fixed with the right equipment. What happened 3 years ago, I have told no one except my wife, and telling her was not easy, and she has not known what to make of it either. I was doing a site assessment on a tract of timberland in a remote part of the county. A developer out of Lexington was looking at the land for a small subdivision, maybe 12 or 15 lots, and they needed a preliminary evaluation of the site conditions before they committed to purchase. My job was to walk the tract, assess the topography, check the access road situation, identify any drainage or soil issues that might complicate development. Standard work for me. I do half a dozen of these a year. The tract was about 800 acres, dense timber, mostly second-growth hardwood, with one old logging road running through it that gave me some access but not complete coverage. I was going to have to do the back sections of the tract on foot. This did not concern me. Walking rough country in Harlan County is not something I need to prepare for. I have been doing it my entire working life. I parked at the logging road entrance and went in. Late June, so plenty of daylight, but hot and humid in the way that eastern Kentucky timber gets in summer. That close green heat that does not move because the canopy kills any wind. I worked my way through the front section of the tract, took my notes, and kept going deeper. About 3 miles from my truck, I reached an old creek crossing where a tributary ran between 2 slopes. A natural stopping point where you can sit for a minute and drink some water and look at your maps. I sat at that crossing for maybe 10 minutes, going over my survey notes. Then I heard singing, not near me and not distant. It was coming from below me, from the ground itself, muffled and directional in the way that underground sound is muffled and directional. Unmistakably a human voice, a single voice, female, slow and melodic, something that had the quality of repetition like a song with verses, but no words I could identify in any language I knew. The melody was not complicated, It was the kind of melody that sounds like it was written before there were written songs. I sat at that creek crossing for several minutes, with my water bottle in my hand, listening to a woman's voice sing from underground in 800 acres of timberland that had no mineworks and no structures of any kind. I am familiar with how old mineworkings sound, the ventilation, the drip echoes, the particular resonance of a large underground space. This was not any of that. This was a voice. This was a human voice singing. This was a specific kind of sound that a human throat makes that I have been hearing for 44 years and know with certainty. I walked the area around the crossing. The ground there was solid and undisturbed, no evidence of any collapse or opening. The sound seemed to come equally from everywhere I stood within about a 30-foot radius, the way underground sound distributes itself when you are walking on the surface above it. The song did not stop while I was walking, it just continued, unhurried, patient. I finished my assessment and drove back to town. I had cell signal by the time I reached the county road, and I called up every geological survey database I had access to, which for a landman in Harlan County is a considerable number. No mine works recorded on that tract. No recorded surface collapse history. No subsurface features of any note. My site report for the developer noted some drainage concerns in the lower section and recommended additional soil borings before finalizing the site plan. I did not note the voice. There is no line item in a site assessment report for a voice under the ground. I drove back out there once, about 6 months later, solo, on a winter day when the brush was down and the walking was easier. I went to the same creek crossing. I stood there for 30 minutes, maybe more. Nothing. The crossing was quiet in the way that bare-limbed winter timber is quiet, deeply and absolutely. Whatever had been there was not there in winter. Or it was there and it was not singing that day. Or it sensed something different about me the second time and chose silence. That last possibility is the one I try not to think about too often. The idea that it made a choice. The idea that there is something underneath that ground that has choices to make about when it is heard and when it is not. This channel exists because you keep showing up. Before we go into the second half of tonight's stories, I want to ask you to share this episode with one person you think needs to hear it. Word of mouth is everything for a channel like this. Drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from tonight and which story so far has gotten to you the most. I love seeing where all of you come from. Now let us keep going. Story 9. I want to start by telling you what I do for a living because it is relevant to how I process what I am about to describe. I am an estate sale manager. My name is Helen Pryor, and I have been running estate sales in Southwest Virginia, primarily Smith and Wythe counties, for 14 years. My job is to go into a home after someone has died, catalog the contents carefully, research anything that might have significant value, price the items fairly, run the public sale, and leave the house clear for the family or the new owners. I have been inside hundreds of homes in 14 years. I have seen every kind of accumulation, every kind of absence, every kind of evidence that a life was lived in a particular way. Very little surprises me anymore. The house outside Chilhowie, the elderly widow who died with no children, a distant cousin inherited everything and called me to handle the sale. I went in for the initial walkthrough alone on a Tuesday morning in the fall. The house was unusually well maintained for an estate. The woman had been orderly, books on shelves, dishes and cabinets, clothes hung and folded. The kind of house that suggests a person who had strong feelings about things having the right place. I moved through room by room with my tablet, photographing and noting, pleased with how manageable the inventory was going to be. The front bedroom had been her room. This was clear from the personal items on the nightstand and the style of the furniture. I opened the door and walked in and began my standard survey of the contents. And then I stopped walking because the north wall of the room was not a wall anymore. It was photographs, floor to ceiling, edge to edge. Every inch of that wall covered in photographs. pinned and taped directly to the plaster without frames, without any organizing logic I could identify. No chronological arrangement, no thematic grouping. Just hundreds of photographs covering an entire wall of a dead woman's bedroom. I moved closer and looked at them. They were all photographs of one man. The same man across what appeared to be a span of many years based on the technology of the photographs themselves. The older ones being smaller prints, the newer ones digital printouts. He was in his 40s or 50s in most of them. Average build, unremarkable appearance, the kind of face you would pass in a parking lot and not retain. He was photographed at parking lots. He was photographed through store windows. He was photographed from across restaurant dining rooms. He was photographed through what appeared to be the window of his own home or car. In none of these photographs did he appear to be aware he was being photographed. In none of them was there any suggestion of a posed or consensual moment. He was simply living his life, caught in consecutive moments over what appeared to be years, by a camera he never knew was there. There were hundreds of photographs. I counted roughly 300 before I stopped counting. I went through the rest of the house carefully, looking for anything that would tell me who this man was. Letters, diaries, address books. I found a single framed photograph on the nightstand, the only framed photograph in the house, showing the woman herself as a young woman beside a man who was clearly her husband, who looked nothing at all like the man on the wall. I called the inheriting cousin and described what I had found. He drove out the following afternoon. He stood in front of that wall for a long time, going from photograph to photograph, and then he turned to me and said he had no idea who that man was. He had never seen that face before. He had been the only family with any contact with the woman in her final years, and the man on the wall had never been mentioned, never appeared, never been alluded to. We have no explanation. We do not know who that man is. We do not know when she started or how she got close enough for the photographs without his awareness. We do not know what the tally marks beside some of the photographs mean, or the small annotations beside others, single letters or numbers in her neat handwriting that the cousin could not interpret. We do not know why a woman who left every other aspect of her house in careful order covered one entire wall of her bedroom in surveillance photographs of a stranger. The cousin did not want the photographs. I boxed them carefully and donated the box to the County Historical Society, with a note saying I had no provenance for the contents. The woman is buried in the churchyard in Chilhowie. The man in the photographs is somewhere in the world right now, living his life, and he does not know he is on that wall. He does not know he was watched for years. He does not know he was the subject of something I cannot name, and I'm not sure I want to name, and I hope he never finds out. Story 10. I'm a retired underground coal miner from Dickinson County, Virginia. I worked 31 years underground, from when I was 19 years old until I retired at 50. My name is Orville Bentham, and I'm 70 years old, and I want to say this plainly at the start. I am not a person who is prone to imagination or to telling stories that are larger than the facts. 31 years underground teaches you to stay close to the facts. Your life depends on it. You do not guess underground. You know or you do not go. I have seen things in 31 years underground that have stayed with me. Roof falls and their aftermath. Men hurt in ways that are hard to describe without hurting the people who loved them. Equipment failures at moments when failure should not be possible. I have been in bad situations and I have gotten out of them because I knew the ground and I knew my tools and I trusted the people around me. What I'm about to tell you does not fit into any of those categories. This happened about 6 years before I retired. I was on second shift on a section crew deep steam work 1.5 miles from the portal. It was my assigned task that shift to walk the ventilation overcast and check the airflow gauges at 4 stations through the course of the shift. This is solo work. You carry a methane monitor, a cap lamp, a flashlight as backup, and your radio. You walk through areas of the mine that the production crew is not using. Maintained sections, legal sections, but empty sections. It is quiet work which suits some people and does not suit others. It suited me. I had been doing it for years on various shifts. The section I was checking that night included about 400 feet of passage through old worked-out areas from the 1970s. These areas are required by law to be maintained and ventilated. No production work happens in them, but they are part of the active mine system, and I walked through them regularly. I knew every foot of that passage. I had walked it hundreds of times. I was about 200 feet into the old section, heading toward the third gauge station, when I heard a voice. I want to be very precise about this because precision is what I have. It was coming from the left, from a crosscut that had been sealed with a block wall during the reclamation work. In the 1980s, the block wall was solid. I had checked it myself many times as part of my ventilation rounds. Behind it was worked out void, sealed off decades ago. The voice was coming from the other side of that block wall. Male voice. One-sided conversation. The kind where someone is on a phone or talking to someone you cannot hear on their end. Pauses and then speech. The rhythm of it was completely natural, completely human. He seemed to be describing directions to someone the way you give directions over a phone. Turn here, go past this landmark, and that kind of thing. His tone was patient and slightly amused, the way you are when you have given these directions before. I stood in that crosscut entry with my cap lamp shining on that block wall and listened to a man give directions from behind a sealed void in a coal mine. Then I called out. I said, "Hey, is someone in there?" The voice stopped mid-sentence. There was a silence. Then, the silence had a quality to it that I have thought about many times since. A quality of attention, as if the silence itself were listening back. I got on my radio and raised the section foreman. I told him I was hearing a voice in the old section and asked if anyone had been assigned over there. He said no, nobody was over there, and he sounded appropriately concerned. He said he would send 2 men to check. I told him I would stay put and keep monitoring. The 2 men came through 15 minutes later. We walked the entire old section together. No one was there. The block wall was intact, no openings, no gaps at the mortar joints that something could pass through, or that sound could pass through with any clarity. The foreman called the portal sensors and confirmed no unauthorized entries had registered during the shift. The access log showed no one signed into those workings. We wrote it up as an anomaly and filed it with the foreman's shift report. I listed it as an unidentified sound, possible acoustic anomaly. From another section of the mine, this is a real phenomenon. Mines are large, acoustically complicated structures, and sound travels in unexpected ways through the geology. It is possible to hear things clearly in one location that originated somewhere very different. I put this explanation in the report, and I believed it to a degree. What I could not account for was the voice stopping when I called out. Acoustic anomalies do not respond to being spoken to. Whatever the source was, wherever in the mine that voice had originated, it heard me call out and it stopped. I spoke later to 2 men who had worked the old section back in the 1970s before the reclamation. Neither of them were prompt to talk about it. One of them said that section had always been uncomfortable in a way he could not specify. The other one told me about a man who had gotten separated from his crew during a bad fall in those old workings. A bad fall meaning the roof came down and blocked the passage and cut him off from the rest of the crew. They reached him after almost 18 hours. He was alive, uninjured, but he would not say much about those 18 hours, and he never came back underground after that day. He left the mine and did not return. I'm not saying these things are connected. I'm saying they are the things I know about that section of mine, and I think they deserve to be in the same account, and I leave the connecting of them to whoever is listening. What I know for certain is that on a second shift in Dickinson County, Virginia, something behind a sealed block wall spoke clearly enough for me to hear it 30 feet away, and stopped speaking the moment I responded, and was not there when we looked for it. I filed a report that said acoustic anomaly and I went back to work. But I always took a longer route to the third gauge station after that, one that did not go through the old crosscuts. In 31 years underground, You learn to respect what the ground is telling you and to not stand in the places that tell you to move. Story 11. My name is Edna Markham, and I'm 68 years old. I have lived in Pike County, Kentucky my entire life. I raised 3 children here and buried a husband here. And I have known the same families and the same roads and the same hollows for nearly 7 decades. When I tell you that I know how to read people and how to read a situation, I want you to understand that I'm not speaking from inexperience. I am speaking from 68 years of close observation of a complicated place. I have been a landlord for about 20 years. I own a house that belonged to my mother-in-law, a small 2-bedroom on a county road a mile from my own place. She left it to me and my husband when she passed, and we kept it as a rental rather than selling it because it was paid off and the income helped. I have had maybe a dozen tenants over the years, mostly good people in straightforward situations. Young families getting started, single workers from the various industries that have come and gone in Pike County. I have had 1 or 2 problem tenants over the years, but nothing beyond the ordinary problems that come with renting property. I want to give you all of that background so you understand that when I say I have never had a tenant like this one, I mean it in a way that goes beyond the usual landlord complaints. About 4 years ago, my last tenant had moved on to something better, and I was between renters. I put the word out through the usual channels, the local Facebook groups, the bulletin board at the hardware store, a notice with the property manager at the company office, where a lot of the workers came through. A man came to look at the house on a Thursday afternoon. His name, he said, was Denton Prawl. He was in his early 40s, maybe 42 or 43, soft-spoken and polite in the careful way of a person who has learned to present themselves that way, rather than the natural, easy way of someone who is just friendly. He was tidy, well-dressed without being fancy, no visible problems of the kind you learn to look for. I asked the standard questions. He said he worked remotely, data entry, and some administrative work for a company he was vague about. He said he kept regular hours and would not be any trouble. He paid the deposit and first month's rent in cash, which was not unusual, and he had references that I checked and that checked out. 2 landlords from addresses in different states who said fine things about him. He seemed in every respect like a good, quiet tenant. For the first few months, he was invisible in the way a good tenant is invisible. I collected rent on the 1st of each month, and it was always ready. When I drove past the house, the lights were on in the evenings and the place looked occupied but not neglected. No complaints from the neighbors down the road. My mail carrier told me she had seen him out on the porch a time or 2 and he had waved. Normal, everything normal. It was my neighbor Connie who first said something. Connie lives about a quarter mile down the road from the mantel, and she works the overnight shift at the hospital in Pikeville. She drives past the rental 3 nights a week on her way out, and 3 nights a week on her way back in the small hours of the morning. She knocked on my door on a Wednesday afternoon and said she wanted to mention something. Not to cause trouble, just to mention it. She had driven past the rental at about 3 in the morning on her way home, and every light in the house was on. Every room. The front bedroom, the back bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, all the exterior lights, everything. She had slowed down a little, thinking something might be wrong, but there was no vehicle in the driveway other than his, and no indication of any disturbance. 2 nights later, she had driven past again, at roughly the same hour and the same thing. Every light in the house blazing at 3 in the morning. I went to collect rent on the 1st, and I mentioned it to Denton. I said a neighbor had noticed the lights on very late, and I wanted to make sure everything was all right. He was pleasant about it. He said he sometimes worked late hours when the work was available, and the time difference with wherever the company was based meant he was sometimes on their schedule rather than his own. He apologized that the lights were a bother and offered to get better curtains. I said that was fine, and I did not think much more about it. Then Connie came back about 3 weeks later. This time she said she had seen him outside, not once, multiple times. Standing in the yard at night, she had driven past at around 2 in the morning, and he was standing in the side yard, between the house and the tree line, facing the woods, not moving, just standing there. She had driven home, let her dog out, made herself a cup of tea, gone to bed, and she had not been able to stop thinking about it enough to sleep, so she had gotten up and driven back past at around 3:15, and he was still there. Same position, same direction. Completely still in the dark yard at 3 in the morning facing the trees. I started paying closer attention on my own. I drove past the rental at different hours over the following weeks. I saw him outside at night twice myself. Once at about 11:30, standing at the back corner of the house facing the timber at the back of the property. Once at around 10:30, standing in the front yard, which faces the county road, with his back to the road, facing the house. Both times he was completely motionless. Both times he was standing in a way that I associated with someone who had placed themselves in that exact spot on purpose and intended to stay there. I did not renew his lease when the year came up. I told him I was going to do some renovations and needed the house empty for a while. He left without any complaint or negotiation. He paid his final month, cleaned the house to a degree that was almost startling in its thoroughness, and went wherever he went. He left no forwarding address, which is not required. I never saw him again. The house was fine. Nothing wrong with the structure, no damage, nothing out of place. Everything exactly as it should be. I had the house blessed by my pastor before I put in the next tenant, which I've never done for any other property in 20 years of renting. He did not ask me why. I think he could tell I had a reason. About 2 months after Denton left, I ran into a woman at church who had known my mother-in-law. She asked about the rental house, and I told her I had just had a tenant move on. She asked his name, which I thought was a strange question, but I told her. She went very still. She said her late husband had known a man by that name who had grown up in the county. She said this carefully, the way you say something you are not entirely sure you should say. She said the man her husband knew had been strange in ways that were hard to describe, and that the older people in the community had kept a certain distance from him. She said this man would have been quite old by now, older than me, and she looked at me and she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. I have thought about this conversation many times. I have thought about the standing in the yard. I have thought about the lights. I have thought about that name that 2 landlords in 2 different states confirmed. And I have thought about what it means that a woman's dead husband knew a man with that name who would have been older than me if he were still alive. Some things you do not push on. You learn that in this county. Story 12. What the lineman saw on the pole at midnight. My name is Walter Sizemore, and I worked for an electric cooperative in eastern Tennessee for 26 years before I retired. Line crew, which means I have climbed poles in all conditions. Iced over in February with gear freezing to my hands, and July heat that makes the metal hardware too hot to touch without gloves. In rain hard enough that I could not see the crossarm above me clearly. I have worked midnight calls in the middle of thunderstorms, pre-dawn calls in temperatures that did not register on my truck's thermometer. There are very few things about working outdoors in the dark at height that I have not experienced. My partner on most of those calls for the last 12 years of my career was a man named Kelsey Dunbar, who is one of the best linemen I have ever worked alongside, and who is not a person who invents things or exaggerates them. I have 3 experiences from 26 years of line work that I have never been able to explain. This is the one I think about most often. October, 7 years before I retired. Fault on a rural circuit about 12 miles outside of Greenville. Kelsey and I, his truck and mine, called out around 9 in the evening. The fault was on a span crossing open pasture that backed up against heavy second-growth timber. No houses within sight, no light source anywhere except our work lights in the sky. Clear night, good moon, enough to see the terrain around us without artificial light once our eyes adjusted. The faulted pole was a standard 45-foot Class 2. Nothing unusual about the hardware or the installation. I suited up and climbed, while Kelsey stayed on the ground to hand tools and maintain the clearance zone. We had done this thousands of times. It is a routine with its own rhythm, questions, and answers, between the man on the pole and the man on the ground, the passing of tools on the handline, the brief conversations that keep both of you present and focused. I was about 40 feet up and 20 minutes into the repair when Kelsey went quiet in the middle of a sentence, not trailing off the way someone does when they lose their train of thought, stopping mid-word as if something had interrupted him from the outside. I called down, "What was that?" He did not answer immediately. Then he said, "Keep working. Just keep working." I kept working. I asked again what was going on. He said, "Nothing. Keep working." I know Kelsey's voice. I have been on the end of the handline from Kelsey Dunbar for 12 years. His voice in that moment had a quality I had not heard from him before, and have not heard since. Not fear, exactly. Something more careful than fear. The tone of someone choosing their words and their volume with precision. I kept working. About 3 minutes later, he said, "Okay," and moved on. I finished the repair and came down and asked him what had been at the tree line. He did not want to talk about it. He packed his tools for a while. Then he said there had been something at the edge of the timber. He said it had been roughly human in shape, but wrong in the ways that matter. Too tall, too dark against the dark tree line, proportions that did not sit right. He said it had been completely still, which was how he had spotted it, because a living thing moving through tree line draws your eye, but a thing that has stopped draws your eye differently, in the way that a wrong object in a familiar scene draws your eye. He said it had been watching me. Not the truck, not the equipment on the ground, not him. Watching me specifically, 40 feet up on the pole. He said when he called out to keep working, it was because he did not want me to look at it. He had a feeling, he said, and he was not someone who talked about feelings on a job site. He had a feeling that if I looked directly at it, something would change, and he did not want to find out what. He watched it for about 3 minutes, he said, while I kept working, and he kept his voice calm on the handline. Then it moved back into the timber in a way he could not precisely describe. Not walking, not running. A transition from being present to not being present that he could not account for with ordinary motion. We drove home separately that night. We did not talk about it again until I brought it up about 2 years later, and when I did, he gave me one sentence. "I know what I saw, and I know what I felt, and I'm not interested in going back over it." I respected that, I still do. What I carry from it is the detail he gave me without being asked. The detail I think about on certain nights, when I am outdoors after dark. He said it was watching me specifically. The man up in the air. Not the truck, not the ground, not the other man. The one at height. I spent 26 years working on poles, and I cannot tell you why that detail matters as much as it does to me. But it does. If you have made it this far tonight, thank you. Genuinely. And I want to ask something of you right now. If you have a story, a real one, something that happened to you or someone close to you that you have never been able to explain, submit it to us. The link is in the description. We protect your privacy, and we take these accounts seriously. Your story may be the next one someone hears on a dark night and finally feels less alone because of it. Now, 3 more stories. Story 13, The Cabin Registry. I am a travel nurse. My name is Blanche Okafor, and I work 12-week contracts across the country, which means I have lived in a lot of rented accommodations in a lot of places. I've stayed in extended stay hotels, corporate apartments, rooms rented from strangers through apps, and most frequently in short-term cabin rentals, because I like privacy and space, and the ability to cook real food rather than eating out every night. I have rented probably full 40 or 50 cabins over the past 6 years in states from Vermont to Arizona. I know what a rental cabin looks like when it is well maintained, when it has been neglected, when the owner is attentive, and when they are not. I've seen a lot of other people's vacation spaces. What I found in a rental cabin in Ashe County in North Carolina about 2 years ago is the reason I now research every rental property thoroughly before I book it. and why I check every room, including every closet, before I bring my bags inside. The cabin was listed as private and remote, both of which were accurate. It sat at the end of a private gravel lane in the mountains, surrounded by timber, about 8 miles from the nearest town. 2 bedrooms, deck with a mountain view, wood stove in the living room, well reviewed by previous guests. The listing photographs showed a clean and comfortable interior. I booked it for a 12-week contract stay at a regional hospital about 40 minutes away. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon in October with the lights still good. The access code worked, the cabin was clean, and my initial walkthrough of the main rooms confirmed that the listing photographs were accurate. I was satisfied. I started carrying my things in from the car, unpacking the way I do at the start of a contract, which means putting things in their places immediately, so the space feels like home and not a hotel. The second bedroom was the last room I checked before I finished unpacking. I opened the door and the room looked like the photographs. Bed, dresser, braided rug, one small window. I went to the closet to assess the hanging space, because I keep my work clothes there, separate from everything else. I opened the closet door and looked at the inside of the door. There were names written on it. On the inside face of the closet door, covering the surface from roughly knee height to as high as someone standing inside could reach, there were names written in what was clearly several different handwritings, dozens of them. First names mostly, though a few had what might have been initials after them. They were written in pen, in pencil, in what looked like marker in a few cases. Some were accompanied by dates, written in the same hand as the name or in a different hand adjacent. The dates I could read spanned from 2014 to within a few months of my arrival. Some names had tally marks beside them, the kind you make to count things. Some had a single letter or a short notation I could not interpret. I stood in front of that open closet door for a significant amount of time, long enough that the light outside the window changed. I was trying to organize what I was looking at into something that made sense, and I was not succeeding. The most generous interpretation was a guest tradition, the kind of informal record-keeping that sometimes develops in a rental property, the way people carve their names into lookout post railings or sign a guest book. But a guest book is visible and communal. This was on the inside of a closet door. The door had to be closed to see the full extent of it. You would not find this by accident. You would find it only if you opened the closet. The dates bothered me. Not all names had dates, but the ones that did had them written in what I read as the same hand, not the hand of each individual guest. Someone had been recording the names and dates, someone with consistent handwriting that ran through the years of the record. The tally marks bothered me more. I photographed everything and called the property management company. The woman I reached was dismissive at first, the kind of professional dismissiveness that handles unusual guest complaints by minimizing them. She said guests sometimes wrote notes in rentals, and that housekeeping would address it. I told her I had photographed it, that the handwriting was clearly from multiple people and multiple years, and that I was not comfortable staying until I had some understanding of what I was looking at. I used the word uncomfortable twice, and I am not a person who uses that word lightly, having worked emergency nursing for 11 years. She put me on hold for a long time. When she came back, her tone had changed completely. She told me that the property had previously been managed by a different company, that their company had taken it over about 1.5 years ago, and that she was not able to speak to the history of the property before that transition. She offered to move me to a different cabin at no additional cost. I took the different cabin. Before I left, I photographed the door thoroughly. I have those photographs. I have looked at them many times, trying to read more meaning into the dates and the notations than I can actually extract. The name count in the photographs is somewhere between 60 and 80. The date range is 9 years. The tally marks appear next to approximately a third of the names, and I have not been able to determine what they are counting. The thing I keep returning to is the location, on the inside of the closet door, facing inward. Whoever was writing and maintaining that record was doing it from inside the closet, standing inside the closed closet door with the light off or the light on, writing names and dates and making tally marks, and then opening the door to leave, over 9 years, in a rental cabin in Ashe County, North Carolina. I do not know who stays in that cabin now. I hope they checked the closet. Story 14, the hitchhiker on Route 23. I want to be clear from the start that I do not pick up hitchhikers. I have never picked up a hitchhiker in my life, and I was not intending to on the night I am about to describe. My name is Jasper Wolf, and I am a 57-year-old electrician from Big Stone Gap, Virginia. And what I'm telling you happened about 3 years ago on a stretch of US 23 between Pound and Jenkins. I was coming home from a job in Pikeville, Kentucky. It was late after 11, and I was tired but alert. The kind of tired where you know you need to get home, and so your body is cooperating. The road was empty, which is normal for that stretch at that hour. Mountains on both sides, no lights, just the white dashes coming at me in the headlights. I saw the person about a half mile before I reached them, standing on the shoulder, facing the oncoming lane, which was my lane, just standing there on the shoulder of a divided highway at 11:15 at night. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman. Young, dark hair, no luggage, no visible reason for being on the side of a highway in the dark. I drove past her. I did not slow down. I checked my rearview mirror. She was directly behind my truck. Not running, not moving, just there. One moment she had been 200 feet ahead of me, and in my rearview mirror she was directly behind my bumper, keeping pace with my truck at 65 miles an hour. Standing upright, not running, keeping pace. I floored it. I watched my rearview mirror. At 70 miles an hour, the shape fell back, and within 30 seconds, it was out of range of my lights. I drove the remaining 40 minutes to Big Stone Gap without touching my brakes. I have told this story to 3 people. All of them have suggested explanations. Trick of the headlights, reflection from a road sign. 2 separate people that I was conflating in my memory due to fatigue. I was not conflating anything. I saw a person standing on the shoulder of the highway ahead of me. And then I saw that same person directly behind my moving vehicle, traveling at highway speed without running. Those are 2 separate observations from 2 separate moments, with maybe 10 seconds between them. I am an electrician. My profession requires me to observe and record accurately, or people get hurt. I know what I saw. I still drive that stretch of road. I have not seen her again. I do not have an explanation, and I'm not going to pretend to have one, just because the alternative is uncomfortable. Story 15. I saved this one for last deliberately. This is not a second-hand account. This did not happen to a friend or someone who sent in an account. This happened to me personally, and to my daughter 4 years ago, and I have thought about it nearly every week since. My name is Cassie Holbrook. I'm 43 years old. I live in a rural part of Floyd County, Virginia, in a house my grandparents built in 1954. It is at the end of a quarter-mile gravel driveway off a county road. My nearest neighbor is about a third of a mile away through the timber. The driveway is long enough and curved enough that you cannot see the house from the county road, and you cannot see the road from the house. My daughter was 9 years old at the time of this story. I need you to understand the geography, because it matters for what I could not explain. A car turning onto my driveway makes a specific sound I can hear from the kitchen, with the television on at normal volume. I have been in this house long enough to know that sound the moment it starts. Gravel has a particular pattern of crunching as a vehicle moves from the road toward the house, getting louder, then stopping when the car parks. I know that sound at any hour. I have never missed it. It was a Tuesday night in March. My daughter had been in bed for about an hour. I was at the kitchen table with the overhead light on, doing paperwork, tax forms, and some household bills, with the television on low in the next room. Routine evening. Nothing about the hour or the night to suggest anything was coming. At 11:40 in the evening, I heard a knock at my front door. 3 knocks, deliberate and evenly spaced. A polite knock, not urgent, not aggressive, patient. The kind of knock that says, "I am here and I can wait." I had not heard a car on the driveway. I had been sitting at the kitchen table for the full hour since my daughter went to bed. Nothing had come up that driveway. Whatever was at my front door had not arrived by car. I noticed Duke. Duke is a large mixed breed, part shepherd, who has been my company in this house for 6 years. He alerts to everything. He barks at deer at 100 yards. He wakes from a dead sleep when someone parks at my property gate. There is no scenario in 6 years of living with Duke where a person arrived at my front door without Duke alerting long before they knocked. Duke was in the corner of the kitchen, head up, eyes on the door, not making a sound, not growling, not whining, not moving, just watching the door in silence. I got up and went to the front door. I did not open it. I looked through the peephole. There was a boy standing on my porch. He appeared to be about 10 or 11 years old. He was wearing dark pants with a center crease and a white button-down shirt with the collar buttoned, clean and unwrinkled, like a school uniform from a private school that requires formal dress. His hair was neat. He was standing about 3 feet from the door, hands at his sides, and he was looking directly at the peephole. Not at the door in general, at the peephole, as if he knew exactly where to look. I said through the door, "Who is there?" He said, "I need to use the telephone." The voice was a child's voice, clear and appropriately pitched for his apparent age, but the tone of it was the thing that made the fear arrive. Completely neutral. Not the forced calm of a child controlling panic. Genuinely neutral. The way a phrase sounds when it is being delivered rather than felt. I said, "Where are your parents?" He said, "I need to use the telephone." The exact same words, the exact same inflection, as though the question had not registered. Duke still had not made a sound. I said I was going to call someone to help him and to wait right there. I walked back to the kitchen table and got my phone. I was away from the door for approximately 45 seconds. I came back and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. I turned on the porch light. I turned on the exterior floodlights covering both sides of the house and the front yard out to about 50 feet. I looked through the window beside the door. No one on the porch, no one in the yard, no movement at the end of the driveway. No car, no sound of a car pulling away on the county road. I called the county sheriff. A deputy came within 20 minutes. They drove the road both directions, checked the ditch lines and shoulders, checked the nearest neighbor's property. Nothing. No child anywhere. The deputy suggested the kindest possible explanations. Wrong address, parent pulled the child before I could help. He was doing his job. I did not argue, but Duke did not bark. And I was awake, and the boy was looking at the peephole before I got there. My daughter woke up the following morning and asked why I had been standing on the porch so late. I asked her what she meant. She said she had woken in the night and looked out of her window and seen a figure on the porch. I was not on the porch at any point that night after the knock. The figure my daughter described from her window was not me. I moved her to the interior bedroom with no exterior window the following weekend. I told her it would be cozier for winter. She is 13 now and has not asked about that night again. I hope she has forgotten it. I have not. And that is where we leave it tonight. 15 people. 15 things that should not have been there and were. Something in a culvert. Something in the trees. Something that keeps the wrong hours in the wrong places. And something that knocked on a door after midnight and asked to come in. If you listened to every one of these tonight, I have 2 things to say to you. First, thank you. This channel is built by listeners who stay until the end, and you are the reason it exists. Second, please subscribe if you have not already. Hit the notification bell. Leave a comment about which story tonight you are still thinking about, because I will be reading every single one. If you want to go deeper, the Park Ranger Files membership is open. The link is in the description below. Members get early access to new episodes, extended cuts with additional accounts that did not make the main episode, and the knowledge that they are directly supporting the work of keeping these stories alive and giving them the respect they deserve. These are real people, real experiences, and none of them had anywhere to put what happened until they sent it to us. If that is you, if you have something you have been carrying for years that you have never been able to explain, submit it. The contact is in the description. We will treat it carefully, and we will make sure it is heard. Take care of yourselves out there. Keep the lights on if you need to. We will be back soon.